Okay, so this is our second video for day one of our online qualitative research methodology residential school. I've got to adjust my microphone. Hold on. So, now you know what individual interviews are all about, you need to start preparing for your interview. And the first thing to do is to make for yourself an interview guide. You have two handouts on the Moodle site, one developed by one of the textbook's authors and one from a project of a colleague of ours, Danielle Every, on community fire safe groups and bushfire knowledge and response. So have a look at those if you want a sense of what a guide actually looks like. Now let's start off with the definition of what an interview guide is. The interview guide includes both your questions and a schedule for the timing of questions, as well as information to help guide the interview process and opening and closing scripts. Although developing your questions is a key part of the interview process, we're also interested in formulating a logical flow in which we might ask these questions. That is, we don't want to start talking about someone's pet, then jump to their relationship with their children, then ask another question about pets. We don't want to jump around all over the place. We want a nice structure between our questions, so the questions flow from one to the other. You also don't want to ask people really sensitive questions straight away. You wouldn't do this in a regular conversation unless you knew the person very well. We warm up to these things. Now, an interview guide also includes what you need to say before your interview. This includes gaining people's consent to being interviewed. Even though you might have done this via email or in person prior to the interview, you still have to do it again just as the interview starts. Now, it can also help if you're new to this, to interviewing malarkey, to include in your interview guide some things to talk about as you're meeting your interviewee to help put them at ease. Small talk. A little bit of chatter at the start of the interview just to put people at ease. Now, an interview guide should also include some ways to structure the conversation so the interviewee has a sense of what they're going to be asked next. These also serve as good ways to link parts of the interview that might not hang together that easily. Now, have a look at the interview guide from Danielle Every, her research on community fire safe groups. You'll see that it includes a series of questions and that the questions build from straightforward, concrete questions about group membership into recalling events prior to a bushfire, then the fire, talking about the bushfire itself. It's not until question 17 that the guide starts to ask quite sensitive questions about physical or mental illness and age and all that stuff, and how that might have impacted their bushfire response. You'll also see that the guide includes prompts for the interviewer to use to help elicit the rich detail that she needed for the project. And you'll see that throughout the guide, there are structuring sections. These help the interview move from one topic to the next when there isn't necessarily an obvious segue between those topics. It also helps introduce a series of questions. Now, you won't see any opening and closing information in that guide. We'll cover this in more detail in part 4 of this video series. Now, the first step in developing an interview guide is to brainstorm a list of potential questions. You can start from scratch here by taking your research question and breaking it down into smaller parts. Now, have a look at the other interview guide on Moodle. This one's from the authors of the textbook, and it's an interview guide for research on lesbian and gay parenting. So the larger research question, which is broadly, what is the experience of gay and lesbian parents, is broken down into parts that are then developed into interview questions. People's feelings about having children, how they started a family, some of the challenges they face in relation to prejudice and stereotypes, what they love about being parents, what they hope for, the impacts of parenting within the broader community. So you see those interview questions. So to develop these questions, the authors had looked at previous literature on parenting, on gay parenting, and have drawn from their own observations and experiences to identify some of the multiple aspects that shape the parenting experience for gay and lesbian parents that they need to cover in their interview. If you have a look at the Community Fire Safe Group interview guide again, our research question there was, has the South Australian CFS engagement program community fire safe? Has it had a measurable effect on improving community safety, survival, recovery, and resilience in the Sampson Flat Fire area? But the interview question wouldn't be, has being a member of this group had a measurable impact on improving blah, 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 blah? That's too broad. It's too broad and too complicated a question. It includes more than one clear concept, and it uses terminology that people might not use themselves, such as resilience. And it would feel uncomfortable having such a large question asked of you if you were a participant. It's that big question. That would really stump a lot of people. So we're looking to develop interview questions that are concrete and focused and spoken in a way that's easily understood. So, for example, in the Community Fire Safe project, Danielle and her colleagues asked people a series of questions about their bushfire preparation and planning before and after becoming a member of a group, including different aspects of planning that we know from other research are helpful in bushfire safety. Each question that they developed only had one concept in it, and they were written in an easy-to-understand language. Now, looking at the questions that other people have used in a similar topic to yours is really, really helpful here. It's possible to adapt questions that other people have developed from in previous studies to your particular interview. That's worth doing. Now, a common trap for new interviewers is using your research question as your interview question. These are, of course, related, but interview questions are worded quite differently, and they are often quite a few of them, whereas usually you only have one or two research questions. And your research question tends to be much broader and can often be much harder for your participant to answer. If, for example, you asked your broad research question, say, what is the experience of gay and lesbian parents? Your participant may ask, do you mean my experience? Or they may say, I don't know where to start. Sometimes the question is too big. You can't really just start with that research question. Sometimes you can do that, but as a beginner, if you're just starting out doing research interviews, I would avoid it. Sometimes you can go in and just say to someone, look, this is my research topic, this is my basic research question, I'd love to just talk you through it. And that's the start of the interview. But you have to manage an initial bit of awkwardness when someone's not quite sure what to talk about. It's you need to get used to that uncomfortable bit at the start. If you're just starting out in research interviews, avoid that uncomfortableness and just break down that big research question into small questions, and that will help get your interview off. Give it some momentum. Someone feels they can answer your questions straight away, and it's a nice feeling when that happens. So questions that speak directly to people's experience and more focused to ensure your interviewee can easily answer your initial questions. Okay. I'm so sweating. Oh, God. Need a drink. Can you bear with me? Okay, Google, what's the temperature outside?
In Annandale, it's currently 30.
Admittedly, that doesn't sound too warm. It is for me. Remember where I'm from. I lived for a long time in Scotland. It is boiling. I will never stop complaining about the heat. Okay, can you see me sweating? Yes, I'll stop going on about this. This is going to be a dry husk at the end of video 4. Anyway, let's carry on. So, small interview questions. Don't start off with your big research question. Come up with interview questions so you don't have your interview start off with a, I don't know, response from your participant. That can be really hard to recover from an initial response like that. And it's really hard to recover from a first impression that you're giving off, which is the person just going, oh my God, this is going to be really bad. Try to create a good first impression, start the interview off well. So, interview questions, different from your research questions. So always advise you to come up with interview questions. Now, what I'd like you to do is to take that other interview guide, the one from the authors of our text, it's labelled Material Example 4.1, and look to see if you can find these different types of questions in there, in that second interview guide. Go through and see if you think the questions have the good qualities I describe here on this slide. So the first good quality is whether the question is an open one. one that you can't answer with a yes and a no. Next are questions that are not leading. So asking how much prejudice have you encountered is both closed and leading. It assumes the particular interviewee has encountered prejudice. It kind of forces them to reframe their experience to meet your assumption that they have experienced prejudice. You also want to just have one concept per question. So don't ask, have you experienced prejudice and harassment? You're actually asking two different questions there, but you're conflating them into one. You also want to keep your questions reasonably short. Keep them clear and be as precise as you can be. In terms of clarity, we as psychologists are at particular risk of using jargon. We have lots of jargon. We use it all the time. Cognitive dissonance. What the heck is that? So avoid jargon and complex language. And linked to that, don't assume that your particular interviewee will share your definition of things. So don't assume your participant will attach the same meaning to mental illness as you do. It's raining. It's hot and it's raining. That's why it's hot. It's humid, innit? Can you hear the rain? Don't worry, I've got a roof over my head. I'm not going to get wet. This is just the sweat. How attractive am I sounding right now? So a good idea is to ask the participant what a particular concept means to them. Particularly concepts are important to your research. So with research on student mental health, you could ask the participant how they would define mental health, just to check that your understanding of that term is the same as the participants or whether it's different. Sometimes those are tough questions, so have prompts at hand. You know, if you're asking someone what do you think of this concept? What do you think this concept means? It might be a quite difficult question, particularly if that concept is dressed up in jargon. So have some prompts ready just to find another way into that question. Now, finally, try to ask emphatic questions. This is all about putting emphasis in your question and emphasis on what the participant thinks, and that you are really focused on what their experience is rather than someone else's experience. And typically you do this by putting the subject before the verb. So, what do you think? Yeah, put the subject before the verb. You before think. What do you think? Now, when you've established good rapport with your interviewee, or when your interviewee feels knowledgeable about your research topic, you can get away with some of these poor quality questions. So asking a closed question can still result in an open answer, or else doesn't disrupt the flow of the conversation, because the conversation's flowing well already, so it's not going to be stopped by a yes/no question. It'll keep going. Sometimes leading questions can be useful because a participant can confront those assumptions that you're carrying and correct you on those assumptions. But again, you need to have good rapport with your interviewee for that to happen, for them to feel as though they can point out, actually, you're mistaken. They have to be quite relaxed and comfortable with you to be able to correct you on those sorts of things, generally speaking. But generally speaking, what I would say is stick with these sorts of questions that have those good qualities that are described on the slide. But questions are not enough. You also want to use prompts and probes. These can act as reminders to you to make sure you seek out richer levels of detail. It's rare for someone's initial answer to go into things that deeply. Sometimes your interviewee is just testing the ground, seeing if what they have to say is of interest to you. If you confirm that it is of interest to you, then they're more likely to go into a bit more detail on it. They will let you into their thoughts and feelings about the topic. You want to have these prompts there. Write those prompts down, prompts and probes. Write them down for your interview guide. Things like, tell me more about that, or can you give me an example of that? But just be careful not to read those prompts and probes out loud, verbatim, because it can come across as inauthentic. Remember, these things that you're using, they should be in your interview guide, prompts and probes, just to remind you to dig a little deeper into the answer. But they're also there to convey your interest in what the participant is saying. And if you read your prompts from a script, it can give the impression you're really not that interested, but you're just going through the motions. Now, some of your prompts can be as simple as a nod or a mm-hmm. But here comes our first difference between face-to-face interviewing and online interviewing. In a face-to-face interview, you can use paralinguistic feedback, but when online, it doesn't always work as well. Sometimes it can actually cut off your participant, depending on what communication software you're using. But paralinguistic, by the way, I'm just meaning like that, that kind of thing. Ooh, ooh. Well, yeah, better than that. But, those little utterances that are encouraging. If you're using some particular types of software, the moment you speak, your interviewee's mic gets cut off. Now, I'm going to get a bit techie here, but it's kind of important. Ideally, you want a system that has full duplex, but some systems only offer half duplex. I'm not talking about Lego bricks here, duplex. Now, full duplex refers to the transmission of data in two directions simultaneously. A good example of a full duplex system or device is a telephone. Both parties at both ends can talk at the same time without the other one getting cut off. An example of a half-duplex system is a walkie-talkie device, when only one person can talk at a time. You have to do that thing where you go blah, 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 over, just to signal that the other person you're talking to can now talk. So that's half-duplex. Only one person can speak at a time. Now, the software Zoom that you're going to be using is full duplex, but not all internet communication software is full duplex, so watch out for that. So if you do go on a half duplex system, your interviewee is put on mute. Sometimes in some systems, your picture will flash up on the screen, which is kind of weird. That can happen in Zoom, but I'll show you how not to make that happen in Zoom. Was that a sentence? I'm really sweating. I'm glistening. Now, the other problem is with silence. Silence is really golden in research interviews, as if you allow enough silence, you give your interview plenty of time to gather their thoughts. But silence on a computer teleconference forum can be interpreted sometimes as a fault with the software, or a concern that the connection has gone down. The internet connection's not working. The way to avoid this is to make sure you move and nod and just don't freeze on screen, just to convince your participant that you're still alive and the internet connection is still working. Now, once you have your list of interview questions that you've developed from your research questions and you've noted down some good prompts and probes, you want to go through your interview questions and evaluate them and go through them and make sure they are good questions. And here are a few questions you can ask of your questions that will help with this process. So, how does this interview question help me answer my research question? Are there problematic assumptions embedded in this question? How would I feel if I was asked this question? How are participants from different backgrounds likely to feel if asked this question? Now, that links to cultural awareness and cultural safety stuff. Another question you can ask of your question is this question likely to be meaningful to the interviewee? What difficulties do I foresee arising from this question? Could this question stump the interviewee? If it does stump them, how will I handle this? How will I recover? And then jot that down as a prompt, as a reminder if things get stuck at that point after that question. Finally, ask of your question, is there a simpler, more direct way of saying this? Okay, that's enough for this video. Part 3 coming next, which is all about what else to do to prepare for your interview. So till then, ta-da!